The Association of American Medical Colleges is pleased to welcome you to our series, Building the Future of GME Recruitment with Eras and Thalamus Technology, Data, and Impact. Today's webinar is on building better scorecards in Cortex and Thalamus Core. We are recording. We'll make the archive available after, and we'll email you once we post that. We did mute all participant audio. If you need help, please send us a message. The presentation does include time for Q&A, and you may submit a question at any time by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's now my pleasure to welcome Laura Fletcher. Laura.
Great. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Fletcher, a selection scientist within the Admissions and Selection R&D team here at the AAMC. The goal of this webinar today is to provide you some tips and best practices for your selection process, including steps you can take to optimize your use of Thalamus in your selection process. We hope you'll walk away with a few ideas or opportunities to refine or revamp your selection process and to better utilize the Thalamus platform. Some of what we present may be useful to you in the short term, and some may offer more long-term goals, and that's okay. By the end of this webinar, we hope you'll be able to understand the importance of standardization and triangulating across multiple application components, identify some do's and don'ts of different application data and effective use of application review and interview, describe different types of rating scales and key components of those rating scales, and of course, to understand the steps for setting up scorecards in Thalamus. And this is when we'll be demoing the Thalamus platform. So let's start with the process for establishing some evaluation criteria. Before reviewing applications, it's really important that you and your reviewers are on the same page as to when and how you'll consider information to evaluate applicants. So creating evaluation criteria or identifying the competencies or characteristics that you want to evaluate and then having scoring rubrics to evaluate them really ensures that applicants are evaluated against a common standard and helps to mitigate potential bias. And in a standardized process, your evaluation will consider the same information at the same stage of application review and in the same way for all of your applicants. Creating these kinds of clear policies and processes for application review also helps to ensure that everyone is on the same page. And that's also why it's important to train your reviewers and interviewers on how to use the rating scales, so that they are interpreting the competency and applying the scoring rubrics in the same way. And this improves the reliability, the validity, and fairness of your whole process. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll provide more detailed information on establishing evaluation criteria and rubrics, the process for evaluating information across all of your applicants, and a bit more about the importance of training. And again, these are all crucial to ensure that reliable and fair evaluation of your applicants. Establishing clear evaluation criteria is a key step because it helps improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the whole selection process so that you can more quickly identify those applicants who are more likely to succeed in your program. When your raters assess the same competency or characteristic, your evaluation gains validity. And when you look across the various ratings and pieces of information through the process of triangulation, you get a clear picture of the applicant's competency and readiness for residency. And when you collect consistent evaluation criteria, like ratings for a competency, across two or more raters, you're able to compare and then combine those ratings into summary scores. When we want to triangulate data, it's really important to know which data sources you have available and what information they have, but also their strengths and weaknesses. So in this next section, we'll cover the kinds of tools that you have available in your selection toolkit and provide some do's and don'ts for how you can successfully integrate them into your process. As we all know, you have multiple sources of information available to you during the selection process. And the goal is to find the best combination of information available that help you evaluate those critical competencies or attributes. And so your main job in this process or purpose is to think intentionally about these tools and combine them to create a more complete picture of your applicants. And this may seem difficult at first, but you're likely not strangers to this kind of process. For example, when a physician evaluates a patient, they don't just rely on one tool for diagnosis. They talk to the patient and gather a history. They observe the presentation. They might run multiple tests that provide similar or potentially very different information. And all these things are done because each piece only tells one part of the story. And so to get a more complete picture, the physician really needs those multiple sources of information. Similarly, in the residency selection process, you're also drawing on multiple samples of information. You look across the application, academic metrics, letters, and the interview itself, and some are high-level information and allow you to see some general patterns and trends, but the interview can allow you to dig even deeper. And so this scientific way of thinking is also how we want to design our selection systems. To create that evidence-based selection system, you need to be aware of the kinds of information each tool is designed to gather and the strengths and weaknesses of those tools. For example, given the nature of information in the application, you're often just scratching the surface of who the applicant is. You're not able to get a very in-depth look at some of those critical competencies. So you're using the application to look at trends or getting a general sense of things. The interview is your opportunity to dig deeper into the applicant's competencies to understand how well suited they may be for your program. And so thinking about the kinds of selection information you're looking for is important when deciding the kinds of scoring rubrics to use. The more detailed rubrics may not make as much sense for the application review, but would pay off in the interview. And we'll circle back to this a bit when we discuss rating scales and rubrics a bit later on. The goal of evidence-based selection systems is to assess multiple competencies and capitalize on the strengths and weaknesses of each tool to create that more complete picture of your applicants. Let's go through some do's and don'ts then for how to select and then integrate different pieces of information into your evaluation and selection process. So when selecting and evaluating application data, you'll want to consider several application data points, so not to overemphasize any one piece of information. And you can draw on multiple different sources to see those trends or patterns. And this really does help to paint that more complete picture of an applicant standing on a competency. There are also some general things you'll want to avoid. So you'll want to avoid evaluating quantity of mostly anything over the quality. So for example, do the number of experiences of a particular type actually matter? Or is it more the competencies learned or the depth of commitment shown that are more important? Also, overemphasizing any of the following kinds of data. So any one piece of information, like overweighting an exam score or a program signal, focusing on specific types of experiences or boards, things like that, rather than the variety of experiences that could still reflect the same type of competency. Small differences in exam scores or evaluations might also just be due to natural variation and not an actual reflection of differences in skill or ability. And giving too much weight to sources of information where we know there isn't that much variation across applicants. So things like grades when they're pass-fail or largely the same, and letters that are often overly positive without much variation in qualities described. It's also important to consider the various sources of contextual information. So those things found in the other impactful experiences description, if it's provided, or extensions and interruptions, because it provides some important context around an applicant's background and timeline. So although it takes some additional time, that contextual information can sometimes provide evidence that can ameliorate concerns over things like lack of certain experiences or holes in their timeline. So try to avoid evaluating applicants without first reviewing that contextual information to see if they may actually warrant further review, unless it's something really required for entering your program. An applicant might have little to no volunteer experiences or lower than desired grades, but why might that be the case? So that contextual information can show you that perhaps they were working part-time to support their family, so they didn't have the extra time or resources to devote to volunteer activities or additional studying. And it's important to evaluate those job-relevant competencies and characteristics to mitigate any potential risk of biases influencing your evaluation. We want to focus on what is important to a resident's successful performance in training rather than sometimes unrelated background or experiences. and be aware of the sources of the application information that can leave some reviewers prone to biases that might influence their evaluation. So things like hobbies, honor societies or awards, and just be sure to provide some training to your reviewers so they're aware of it as well. So unsurprisingly, try to avoid considering non-job relevant information, things like some hobbies or interests, if they're really not directly tied to success at the job. And allowing sources of bias to creep into the evaluation process can lead to inaccuracies in results or discrepancies in your evaluation that ultimately make it harder to select the most suitable candidates. As I mentioned previously, the application provides that 10,000-foot view of the application and the applicant. So the interview is your opportunity to gather some more in-depth information. We generally recommend interviews be used to focus on competencies that may not be as well measured by other pieces of information in the application review process. And these are often professional competencies like interpersonal skills or empathy and compassion. We also recommend you blind your interviewers to as much of the application information as possible, so they don't let the applicant's background, experiences, or even academic metrics influence their evaluation of the applicant during the interview. It's best to avoid unstructured interviews. The more structure, the better. And what we mean by structure is to have a standardized set of questions that are asked and to limit the amount of casual conversation, at least until the very end. But there is a sliding scale, so some elements of structure are better than none. We have a set of guidance materials around developing structured interviews, and we have links to those resources available at the AAMC website. So keep in mind that there is no perfect system, but being aware of some of these strengths and weaknesses and keeping in mind those do's and don'ts can really help you stay focused and headed in the right direction. So let's go through a quick example to see how a program might go through this triangulation of information when considering the different sources of information they have available. Here's a program that has identified resilience and adaptability as one of their top competencies with the following definition: perseveres in challenging situations by adjusting behavior or approach, and recognizes and seeks help and support when needed, and recovers from and reflects on setbacks. When reviewing applicants, the program has identified multiple pieces of information from their selection toolkit to get a better picture of this competency. Specifically, within the application, reviewers are looking at experiences, personal statement, letters of recommendation, MSPEs, to get that preview of the applicant's likely resilience and adaptability. And this set of information helps balance between the strengths and weaknesses of the different sources of information. For example, the information comes from different perspectives. You have the applicant's perspective from the medical school and even other people. So even if an applicant describes themselves in an overly positive light, including the MSPEs and structured interview can help provide some corroborating evidence or not. There's also different levels of reliability and validity of the sources. So letters of recommendation don't have much validity, but they can provide that corroborating evidence or perhaps important contextual information to resilience and adaptability that you see from the experiences or the other structured interview questions. And this program also realized that the application isn't necessarily designed to provide a deep dive into this competency. So they use their interview in a really smart way by adding a question specifically designed to gather more direct and detailed information about this important mission-aligned and job-related competency. So using triangulation in this way helps you think through which information will speak to each competency you want to evaluate and can be complemented by other pieces of information within the application. Okay, so now we're going to take a few minutes to do a short triangulation activity. So a poll is going to be popping up, and I'd like you to just take a minute or maybe 30 seconds to look at the category or competency listed and select which components of the application or selection process you think would be relevant to identify that particular category. We have two different questions, so we'll do one and then look at results and then do the second one. To unmute there. Great. So here we can see that for assessing a program's mission or value alignment, there are some things that stand out to a majority, but there's also some big differences. So you can see the experiences and background stands out to a lot of people. Letters of recommendation stands out, and of course the interviews. But it often matters depending on what's important to a program, what is their mission, what are their values, and some of these different elements may speak to that more strongly than another. And so that's part of the reason why we get this wide variation. All right, so let's close that poll and we'll start the second one. All right, here we see some variation results, but we also see a trend towards some key standouts. So again, in the experiences and background, to get some idea of empathy and compassion, a little bit in the hobbies, letters of recommendation, standardized letters of recommendation, and those interviews. So you can see that as we focus on specific competencies, sometimes it's easier to identify which components might be able to speak more strongly to that. So that's really helpful. Thanks, everyone. All right, let's continue on. So the final step in establishing a standardized process for triangulating across parts of the application is to evaluate competencies using scoring rubrics. So remember that a simple rubric is better than no rubric. I want you to take that away. When choosing a type of rubric, you want to consider the practical constraints, like the time, resources, and even evaluators' willingness to use different types of rating scales, and also the type of information that you have for evaluating. So broader generic rubrics can be useful because they can be applied to a range of competencies or characteristics, and may be more practical option because they're relatively inexpensive, both in time and effort to create and also use. So since the information in the application is often more surface level and allowing you to identify those higher level patterns or trends, a holistic whole applicant rating scale may make more sense at the time of application review. Specific or detailed rubrics that focus on specific competencies and are ideal for improving validity and reliability of their evaluations because they align reviewers to the criteria or help reviewers interpret the rating scale points in the same way. And that also helps to better differentiate your scores among applicants. However, they do take more time and effort to both create and use. These kinds of scales may be best suited for the interview where you have a chance to dig deeper into those specific competencies. And competency-specific, more detailed rating scales can add a lot of value, especially with improving your ability to compare across applicants for their level of that competency. So keep in mind that the key to all of these rubrics is the same, which is that they should be job related and designed to include behaviors related to competencies and characteristics that are important to the program's mission and also resident success. And both kinds of rubrics can be created and used in Thalamus. So next, we're going to go through some examples of what these rubrics might look like before we go into the actual demo of how to create them in Thalamus. We'll start with the most rigorous of rubrics, and this is the competency-specific and detailed rubric. So this rubric includes the following elements. It identifies the competency and has a definition. And in webinar 1, we discussed more details around the importance of intuitively naming the competency and also the importance of providing a detailed enough definition that is grounded in both observable behaviors, but also behaviors that are relevant for the job at your program. It also includes a rating scale, here a scale from 1 to 5, and it has descriptions of behaviors that are used to define or sort of describe those low, middle, and high ratings. But here it's defining these ratings in the context of the competency itself. And I want to point out a couple of things to you. So first, you don't need a lot of rating scale points in your rubric for it to be useful. So generally speaking, 3 to 5 points should suffice. And you also don't need behavioral examples for every rating scale point to support a more consistent evaluation by raters. When we pivot to demoing the scorecards in Thalamus, you'll see how you'll be prompted to organize your evaluation criteria first by competency or application component, and then you build specific rating scales within those criteria. So let's continue on with some other example rubrics for now. The competency-specific rubrics can also be broad or less detailed. And so this rubric, as you see, should still include the competency and definition, but it has just 3 rating scale points with 1 example for each. Although this is a simplified version of the previous scale, it still has all of the key elements and will enhance the validity of evaluations, especially related to having no rubric at all, and so allow you to more easily and fairly compare applicants to one another. And there are other kinds of broad generic rubrics. Rubrics may be more generic so that they can be applied to multiple different competencies like this one here. A generic rubric will still have the same main components as the detailed rubric. Again, here you can see the rating scale is 1 to 5, and it includes example descriptives that anchor, define, or describe those low, mid, and high rating scale points, but they're not specific to the competency. Nonetheless, they still help evaluators interpret and apply the different ratings in a similar way. And here are some examples of those broad scoring rubrics that are component specific. Each evaluates 1 application component, such as letters of recommendation or the personal statement. And these are simpler. The rating scale descriptors are not specific to competencies or characteristics, but they do reference general key competencies or general mission alignment. And this is important as any rubric should focus on those job-related competencies or mission-aligned characteristics. But it's important that evaluators are still thinking of what the competencies are or what the mission-aligned characteristics are. So to further support the reviewers, if you select something like this, we would recommend you provide the rubrics with a list of key competencies or a list of mission-aligned characteristics so they have it on hand when they're evaluating. And finally, here's an example of what a whole applicant rubric might look like. This rubric encompasses multiple different competencies or characteristics and may consider multiple components of the application, but the rater provides 1 overall rating. So here, the rater is expected to consider where the applicant falls on each of these criteria or rows, and then make 1 overall assessment. Again, having the reviewers consider multiple pieces of information to then evaluate the trends and patterns. But this does leave it open to the rater's discretion as to how to weight the different components when making their overall rating, which does leave some room for possible bias to influence the ratings provided. So as you've seen, there are numerous ways to create rating scales. And when we get to the Thalamus demo in just a minute, you'll see how you can organize the evaluation system first by what you're trying to measure. That's really key. whether it's competency by application component or even just a general evaluation of the whole applicant. And within each of those evaluation buckets or criteria buckets, you can build different rating scales like what we've seen here with the different kinds of rubrics. And you can adjust the questions as needed for evaluating the application content or specific questions for interview. Okay, before wrapping up this section, I want to note one last thing, which is that even the best selection systems and processes can fail to get us the results we want if people are not taught to use them correctly or if they're unwilling to follow the process. So even the best designed rating scale only works when raters are well trained, calibrated, and kept up to date. So training really transforms those subjective impressions into more reliable, defensible, and fair evaluations. But I do want to acknowledge that training needs to be right-sized for evaluators and programs given the availability and willingness and resources. So for some, this may be a live training with opportunities to do calibration. And for others, it may just be an email with instructions, tips and like best practices. And if possible, we always encourage refresher training just because it helps ensure that alignment is consistent for each season. All right, so now we're going to transition into some use cases. I'm going to introduce a couple of them, and then Shannon will take over from Thalamus, will take over and show us how to do each one in the Thalamus platform. So here's some background information on our first use case. This program receives about 600 applications a year for 5 open positions. The current system assigns 2 reviewers to each application. And due to their available time and resources, they want to use a rubric that they can easily integrate into their current process, even though they plan on developing some more detailed rubrics over the next year or so to implement in future cycles. So this is the whole applicant rubric, and this is kind of what they're hoping to use to evaluate their applicants, where one rater provides an overall rating across multiple different competencies or characteristics. So they look at the whole application and think of what to do. So, okay, Shannon, can you show us how to create something like this in a scorecard in Thalamus?
I can. I'm happy to. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so as everyone is seeing our Cortex application screening tool, in order to get started with building the different scorecards or the rubrics and the competencies that we're talking about today, you're going to navigate to your settings tab. And from here, you're going to select the word score. Your score administration tab is actually exactly the same in both your application screening tool as well as your interview tool. So both in Cortex and Thalamus Core. And so here is going to be where you're going to start with when you've identified what are those things that you are looking for, what are those competencies, what are those components. You'll start with building out those competencies. Many of you that utilized the platform last year know that we have preloaded some sample things for you in there, but you do not need to utilize any of the preloaded information. We really want you to encourage you to build your own. When you are in step 1, again, these are your competencies. So those things that you are looking for to align with your mission or to ensure that the applicant meets those job skills. So some very similar things that you've been hearing Laura talk about as we've been going through those things like leadership or mission value alignment, professionalism, resiliency. You'll be adding that competency simply by selecting the Add Competency button. When you do that, you'll be able to type in the competency that you are looking for. And we're just going to name one here easily without a cap lock on. And then you'll be able to provide the definition or the description of that competency. So, teamwork. That means they're collaborating with others and prioritizing those achieving shared goals. So you'll want to just make sure this is for your use only. Your reviewers, whether they are screening the application or doing an interview, will not see this section. They are going to see your completed scorecards, and I'll be sure to show you that once we've gotten through this. But here is going to be in step 1 where you list your competencies and those descriptions that have that definition in there, so that you have that from season to season, and you have that ability to identify those key things that are going to be those competencies and those key attributes. Once you've saved a competency, now in the same step is going to be where you build out those rubrics or those questions that tease out that competency or identify what those components are in the application. Again, step 1, we're not building a scorecard yet. We are building the building blocks, so to speak, of those elements that we're going to put onto a scorecard. So step 1, creating that competency. And then within the competency is going to be where you can create your question. Now, the rubric that Laura just showed you right before was that kind of overarching, just one question, one scorecard, one rubric. And so what we've done is we've gone into our competency by selecting the edit icon, and we can see I have a question here. My question that I've built is going to allow me to type in the component that I'm looking for, or what the prompt is to the reviewer, such as tell me about a time. So here, then you're able to choose, how do you want that question to be scored or answered? Well, most of what we're showing you today is going to be utilizing what we call a level question type. This is going to allow you to create that rubric that your reviewer then will be able to select and see the definitions of what makes that specific question a poor response or an average response or a strong. You can also enable a tooltip to provide some guidance to your reviewer. If you want them to be looking at a certain part of the application, you could put those instructions here. And we also encourage you, as part of that training process, to really think about the instructions you want to give your reviewers, and maybe you give them some sort of tooltip when it's reviewing an application that's on paper, if you have many instructions you want to give them. You're going to be able to enable a note field for this individual question on your scorecard. And then you're always going to be able to choose the option to have the reviewer mark unable to assess. Again, if there's no evidence of whatever it is that you're looking for in the application or during the interview, you might want to mark that unable to assess. Once you have created your question and select and save, that question is now going to be living in your competency bucket, whatever it may be, that house that it's living in. And now we're ready to go ahead and build a scorecard. Once we have our questions or our content that we're looking for created, we go to the scorecard, and here is where we can create custom scorecards that can be visible in either the Cortex application screening tool or the core interviewing platform. So again, in the very beginning, we talked about identifying what are those attributes or what are those competencies that you're looking for in an application versus an interview. Those are going to be different things, but they might have shared competencies that have just different questions that you're asking. So you'll build your questions or build your rubrics from within that step 1 and then move to step 2. That last rubric that we saw was for the overall application score. So here I've created a scorecard, and I can use my edit icon here to expand. I've named that scorecard. I'm telling the system, where do I want it to be visible? In Cortex for the application review, or in Core for the interview? Or I have the option to turn off a scorecard if I don't want it visible anywhere at all. And then I can manage my scorecard questions. When I select my manage scorecard questions, all of the questions or the rubrics that I have built in each of my different competencies are going to be available for me to choose. Just like if I was choosing ingredients for a recipe from the grocery store, I've just got my list and I can go through and start choosing my questions. I've chosen my question that I built that I've labeled overall competency evaluation. And once I've selected that, I can also tell the system how I want that score to be tallied, a sum or an average. And if there's multiple questions on a scorecard, I can put them in a specific order. Once I have done that and selected save, I will be able to view my scorecard that I've just created by navigating to an applicant, selecting on scores, and when I choose the scorecard of overall applicant score, here's an example of the rubric that we had created for my reviewer to just come in and go ahead and choose the appropriate option for that question. That's how you would build that initial scorecard or that rubric for just one question, one scorecard.
Shannon, I appreciate it. All right. So let's move on to our next use case. So this program receives around 1,000 applicants for a 15 open position, and they assign reviewers to specific parts of the application. Like reviewer A is going to be looking at the personal statement and the letters of recommendation, whereas reviewer B always looks at the application and exam scores, just as an example. So for now, the program wants to focus their reviewers on evaluating general competencies and mission alignment in the content sections that they're reviewing. But depending on how the process works this year, they might consider developing some more specific detailed rubrics. So the idea is that they want to have these kinds of rubrics to evaluate their applicants, where each rater provides one overall rating for competencies and one overall rating for mission alignment for each part of the application they might be assigned to review. All right, Shannon, how might we go about creating something like this as a scorecard in Thalamus?
Okay, so let's go ahead and share that screen again. So here, what we would want to do for that specific rubric is that we would then come back to that settings page, navigate to our score tab, and identify those those competencies and those questions or those rubrics that you'd like to build.
Oh, wait.
So again,
And then just a quick, you might need to try sharing your screen again. I think it might not quite be there yet.
Oh, well, thank you for doing that.
Of course.
Let's go ahead and go back. And Laura, one more time, we are doing the second Cortex scorecard, correct? I just want to make sure I'm sure.
Yep,
Awesome.
yep.
Okay. Let's try this again. How about now? There
Yes.
we go. We're good now. Okay. So at this time, I want to go ahead and show you, because the steps are the same. Remember, we're going to identify the competency that we are looking for, and then we're going to create the question that teases out that specific competency. So here we might have things about alignment, right? And so we would have questions that are related to how to rate the alignment for specific components of an application. Again, just like I did it the first time, I'm going to navigate to step 2, and here I can go ahead and navigate to my application evaluation score for Cortex. That's what I've named it. And I can see these were the questions that I've put on that scorecard. So the steps are very much the same, right? We want to go ahead and we want to identify the attribute or the competency. Then we want to create the rubric, and then we're going to choose that rubric to go on our scorecard. Just repeating those steps again for you. Again, competencies and questions. When we go into a specific competency, like I want to identify mission alignment, I would then say I want to create a new question. My new question button will always be down here on the bottom. And then when I go to create my question, I'm going to type in the text, whether that be the prompt to the reviewer or instructions on how to answer the specific question. I'll then be able to choose my options. And for today's session, we're doing mainly level type options, but you do have other options. And then choosing the appropriate number of levels will then allow you to enter the score values as well as the descriptor. One thing I want to point out here is that the reviewers are not going to see the point value. They will see the content and the description for that content. So once we have done that, I want to show you what my completed scorecard would look like that we just showed you on the slide. And by navigating back to my Cortex platform, I'm able to go to my score. And I can see now, here is that rubric that we just created that would be reviewing those components of the application or the alignment with our mission statement. Is that helpful, Laura?
Awesome.
Should I continue? Okay.
Do you have more? I love hearing you talk about the platform, and it's so clean and
that is
organized.
I really want everyone to know that it is not overwhelming once you understand what it is that we're looking for, which is why it's so exciting today to be here and hear Laura explaining to all of you why you should be looking for certain things or how you should be looking at the application. Once you get into the Thalamus platform, the steps are very much the same. So you're going to be able to rinse and repeat. You'll be able to keep those questions from year to year and make edits to your questions from season to season, utilizing many tools such as duplicating your questions or copying a question. I see lots of questions that are in the chat or in the Q&A about functionality, and I'll be happy to answer those before the end of the session.
Great, thank you so much. All right, let's keep us moving so we have time for that Q&A at the end. So our third use case is now focusing on rubrics that can be set up for the interview. So this program has some key competencies that they want to evaluate because they didn't get a lot of detail about them in the application. So each applicant is going to be interviewed by one person. So they want each applicant to be evaluated on the same set of competencies. They're hoping this new system will help them better differentiate across applicants in that final decision process. So each interviewer is going to be given a rubric. There's 3 different competencies: resilience and adaptability, teamwork, and communication. All right, Shannon.
Absolutely.
How can we do this?
Let's make sure we get this done the right way this time. So how we can do this? Well, we can do this the same way that we have done it with the other ways that we've been showing you, the other rubrics that we've been showing you. So the difference for this one is right off the bat, it's for the interview, which means that when I'm creating a scorecard for my interview, I'm going to want to ensure that that scorecard is labeled as being visible in Core. And I know that many of you asked the question, well, can scorecards be visible in both Core and Cortex? Well, they're designed so only the rubrics or the scorecards that are for the application review are visible in Cortex. We designed it so that only the rubrics or the scorecards that are pertinent to the interview are visible in Thalamus Core. And that's really to make sure that you don't have folks entering scores that are part of the application into the Thalamus Core or vice versa. And as many of you know, our Thalamus platform is always being enhanced by feedback from you. So if you do have certain feelings or thoughts about how you'd like to see things work, please don't hesitate to let our team know, as we're always improving and building off of your feedback. So I'm going to navigate to my interview evaluation in Thalamus Core. And you can see here when I created this scorecard, I utilized the name of that scorecard. You want to ensure that it's something that your reviewers are going to be familiar with. That goes back to the training. I've chosen that scorecard to be in Thalamus Core. And I've put a little description here for myself, including a misspelled word. So that I know from season to season what that scorecard was used for. Again, you cannot delete scorecards once they have been created in your platform. And that's because of your archive mode within Thalamus Core. We don't want to be deleting scorecards that may have had scores associated with an applicant in the past, and to protect the integrity of your archive. We know that that's something that folks really want to do, so I promise we've heard you. But as of right now, your scorecards, once created, will remain from season to season. You are able to delete competencies as long as there are no questions associated in that bucket, so to speak. So here we have my scorecard, and I can see my questions that I've already put on here. If I hadn't had scorecard questions yet, I'm going to select that manage scorecard questions, and my bank of questions, or my grocery store shelf of questions, is going to appear for me to go through and choose the questions that I built in step 1 and put those on my scorecard. If I have multiple questions that are going to go on a scorecard, here in the scorecard score is where I can click and drag and move questions around in any order to display in the way that I want my reviewers to answer. So then we're going to go ahead, once we've told the system what questions we want on that rubric, we're going to select save, and then that scorecard would be available within our Thalamus Core platform and be visible just like it was in our Cortex platform, with the reviewers seeing the pertinent information and giving them the instructions on how to score that applicant. That's all I have for you, Laurel.
We have time for our last use case. Forgot to advance the slide. Here we go. So for this final use case, it's going to involve different rubrics being assigned for interviewers with different roles, like the program director, the faculty, or a senior resident. So with the previous use case, this program also wants to get more detailed information about applicants' competencies during the interview, but each applicant is interviewed by multiple people. So each interviewer is going to be assigned a different set of competencies to evaluate. So in this scenario, there's going to be a total of 4 competencies evaluated throughout the interview process, and they're divided across the 3 interviewers. The program director has resilience and adaptability, the senior resident has teamwork, and faculty member has critical thinking and problem solving. And then that communication competency will be evaluated based on how they respond to the question during the interview. All right, Shannon, take it away.
Great. I think 3 times a charm here. We should be good to go. So again, where are we? How are we going to build multiple scorecards for our individual program director or our faculty members or our residents? We're going to do that by, and just confirming, are you seeing my screen, Laura?
Yes, you're golden.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So again, same steps, navigating to our settings, navigating to our score administration tab. We're going to start with those competencies and questions and those characteristics that those individual reviewers are going to be responsible for answering. We've made sure we've gone in and built a competency such as teamwork. And within that teamwork competency, we're going to build that question that we want on the individual reviewer's scorecard. So again, this is going to be one of those questions where we are providing them with a prompt versus looking for a component of the application. So here we have a question for teamwork to tell me about a time when we had conflict with a team member, and then I'm able to build out that rubric that's going to give my reviewer, while they're in the interview, the ability to have direction and guidance on how best to score or select that individual answer for that applicant. So what I've done, again, step one, those competencies, build out the question, and then I'm going to go to my scorecard. I'd navigate to the bottom, and I promise we've talked about using the add button or moving the add button to go up to the top of the page. But you would select add scorecard, and then you would start building out your individual scorecards for your senior resident interview. So, or for example, or your program director interview, or your faculty interview. And so you can see on these questions that I've pre-built, here's my questions that were identifying those competencies that we talked about on the last screen that Laura showed you. And then if I use my edit button, I'm able to make changes or go to that manage scorecard section where I'm going to choose those individual rubrics that I've created to identify those competencies that the individual reviewer has been tasked with asking. So that is exactly the same process. Again, choosing let me just go back in. I wanted to just show you something again. Choosing how you want that score to be a sum or an average is also going to be a key thing. And we're going to be talking to you more next week about how you can add scores together. Do you want the application score and your interview scores to drive your rank list? Do you want your scores to be a sum or an average? All of that is coming next week as a sneak peek. I think that's what I have. I'm happy to expand on if there's anything else that you need about that, Laura.
Nope, I think that's great. And we can move
Okay.
on to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Shannon. Welcome everybody to the Q&A period for today. I already see a number of questions in the Q&A. Feel free to continue to submit those. We'll try to get through as many as we can before the end of today's session. So there's a few questions in here around just this first one I'll direct to you, Shannon, has to do with the whole settings piece around the competencies and its associated questions. I know you talked about just the point at which you're able to delete those and kind of the historical facet to that. Do you mind kind of just showcasing again that part of the question, not only just at the different tiers, right? The competencies, then the questions,
Yes.
just so people can see that visually.
Absolutely. So let me share my screen. So here within our score administration tab, you'll see in step 1, which is our competencies and questions, competencies are displayed first. You see a trash can icon. That means you can delete a competency, but I can't delete a competency that has questions built in it. So we've given you some tools. If for some reason you really just don't want that question to be listed in a competency, and remember, this is your like wizard behind the curtain work. No one's going to be seeing this. This is you're putting your items on the grocery store shelves is what you're going to want to pull back for your recipe. You don't have to worry about deleting these and or having anyone see questions that aren't going to be used anymore. I really recommend keeping any questions that you've ever created, because why we've designed it for you not to delete it is that, again, it's going to be protected in your archive mode. But if you don't want to have a specific competency, maybe you've decided, you know what, we're not looking for community ties anymore. I can easily delete that competency by moving any questions that are in that specific bucket. This 3-dot menu next to the question or the rubric will allow me to move that question to another competency. And so I could create a competency that's labeled archived questions and move questions that are no longer going to be used into that competency bucket. Once I've moved all of my questions out, I would be able to delete this. You'll notice in your questions, there is no trash can icon because questions cannot be deleted, but they could be moved off of a scorecard, removed from the scorecard itself, and you can even remove them from the competency if you so choose. Is that helpful, Richard? Did I get the gist of that question?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that addresses the organization piece of it. Small little detail there just to clarify, do these questions and competencies carry over from year to year as well?
Yes.
And in that like season to season transition, is that a point at which programs can kind of clean up those questions, or is it the same archival process?
No. So one of the great things about the Thalamus suite of products is you actually have access to your suite of products 365 days of the year. The things that are active within your season are going to be your calendar events, obviously, and creating your itineraries. But all other things outside of that area, such as your program profile or your scoring administration tab, you have access to all year long, so you can make edits at any time. They will populate from season to season, so you never have to worry about going in and looking to see what you did last year in your archive mode. It will be right here for you from season to season.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go and move on to the next question here. This one goes, can anyone but the evaluator and program administrators see what a reviewer has listed on the actual scorecard? Can all
Yeah.
reviewers for applications see what another reviewer scored? Just basically just kind of talking about the ability to control what the reviewers
Yeah.
can see. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have a series of roles within the Thalamus suite of products. Program coordinator, program administrator, and program director have full access to everything within Cortex, Thalamus Core, and Cerebellum. They can see all notes and all scores that have been entered on any applicant at any time. The role of program interviewer, program resident, and program fellow that may be participating in the application review in Cortex will only see the applications that they have been assigned, and they will only see notes and scores that they have written on those applications by themselves. They will never see notes and scores that have been entered by anyone else. Within the Thalamus Core platform, the role of program interviewer will be able to see applicant information, but will never see notes and scores that have been entered by anyone else. They will only ever see their own notes and scores.
Awesome. So it's very user specific. I'm
Correct.
going to kind of pivot a little bit in terms of, again, along the same vein of what the users can see and what folks in your program and team can see. One of the questions just asking if you could show what a tooltip looks like
Yeah.
when it's added to the scorecard. And my additional question there is that tooltip kind of universally seen by your respective reviewers and interviewers? How
Mhm.
does that show or display for your users?
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and let's add a tooltip to a question. I'm just going to go into one of my questions that I know we have on a scorecard. I'm going to use my teamwork competency here. So you're also getting a little bonus sneak here on how you can edit. Again, that pencil and paper icon is our edit icon. I'm going to select to edit this question. And here I could give my reviewer a tooltip that will display as a little question mark in the question. And when they hover over it, that tooltip will appear. So let's type up a tooltip first. So here I'm just going to say, please review rubric.
Mhm.
And I'm going to save my question. And now when I go into my applications and I'm going to be taking a look at that scorecard, let me just go in here. Actually, I did not choose the right question on my scorecard. I want an applicant. 1 second. We're going to go back in and edit that scorecard here so I can just make sure I have the right question. Let's just do that one. Just give me 1 second. I'm just editing a question very quickly. Uh, I remember what question was on my scorecard, everyone. I apologize. Just give me 1 quick second.
Okay.
Application evaluation. We'll do general competencies. Okay. All right. So let's add a tooltip here to my question. Save that question. And now let's go back in. And you can see every time I make a question change, it's going to automatically update on my scorecard. I don't need to do anything to my scorecard. So we're going to go into that scorecard. And here was that applicant evaluation. And if we are moving down, you can see here, there's this little question mark. When I hover over it, that tooltip will appear. That tooltip will be visible to anyone that is entering scores on that scorecard. So whoever that person is that's been granted access to review the applications and they have been assigned that applicant and have been told to utilize that scorecard would be able to see that tooltip on the scorecard.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. So that just goes back to what Laura was talking about earlier in terms of training your reviewers, training your interviewers.
Yes.
It could be about just keeping an eye out for this little question mark icon when they're going through this review process. So
Absolutely. And as a
yeah,
shameless plug for our academy, if any of you are looking for tips and tricks on how to train your faculty, we have added a course on how to train, and it includes some tips on how to give them instructions with your scoring.
that's a perfect segue. We're the last minute here.
Great.
The last question is just for those who are looking for more training around this. Obviously, we have the Thalamus series that's continuing, AMC Thalamus series is continuing. But is there any other resources that folks can sign up for in terms of this technical piece?
Yeah, absolutely. At Thalamus, we really recommend you navigate to our training page. I believe it's in the slide deck as well. Our training page, not only are we doing multiple webinar series such as these, but also within the Thalamus suite of products, such as setting up Cortex, setting up Core, understanding screening and scoring. We do live webinars. We have weekly live open office hours where you can come with your questions. And then, of course, our Thalamus University Online Academy has self-guided modules as well as all of the recordings from all of our webinars available for you. And last but not least, every program has a program success manager that you can reach out to and get one-on-one support for your program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so
Thank you,
much, Laura.
Richard.
Yep, and I will go ahead and close things off here. Thank you to the viewers who were able to join in today. As you may have seen in the kind of turntable slides earlier today, the next one is scheduled for July 23rd. Shannon and Laura mentioned that's where we can really get into the nitty-gritty stuff of combining and weighing scorecards together. But best of luck to you all from here on out, and I'll turn it back to Jennifer to close us out.
Great, thanks so much. Please do give us your feedback on today's session. The webinar evaluation will pop up as soon as we close out. We did record the session. We'll email you when it's ready. On behalf of the AAMC, have a great day.